Okay, we're now approaching the main quarry at Baalbek. And this is the one called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. Now this is at least 1,200 tons, and recent excavations show that there are possibly larger ones underneath it. Okay, now climbing up on top of this massive block of limestone.
Biggest rock in the world, eh?
One of them. So here you get an idea of just the size of this thing. Is outrageous, and in relation to the temple where the other large ones are resting right now, that is the Temple of Jupiter in the background. Like many megalithic sites on the planet, this has been misidentified as possibly being a work of the Romans. Now the Romans built on top of the megalithic constructions at Baalbek, but there's no way they had the technology, tools, or probably even inclination to try to quarry the largest stone that would ever have been done in the Roman Empire, here, somewhat in the middle of nowhere in relation to Rome itself. So what we're looking at is a megalithic work predating the Romans, the Greeks, and the Egyptians by probably thousands of years, by unknown civilization.
I just sat right onto my
clearly had some type of
keyboard.
what we would call
Sorry, man, I didn't reply to your messages
high technology
yet,
capability.
It's been a busy morning.
In the quarry itself here.
It's been a crazy morning.
And you can see the tool marks and the grayness, so you see a lot of weathering on the
I'm gonna have to
surface.
reply to you like
this
in the
is
text.
the
I love
very
you too,
recent,
man.
as in less than 6 months ago.
There. I gotta
Removal
write it back
of material.
For a good wake up.
And you see those interesting, almost crisscross cutting marks, as well as along the bottom of this block. There's a continuous line that goes around it, as if there was another.
Alright, I'm gonna reply to your message right now.
Attempting to be used to
I'm trying to be positive.
This block from the bedrock itself, and underneath an even larger one that they were trying to extract. And we also have these test holes.
To be neutral.
Where they were testing for the integrity of the stone itself, because this material is quite solid and holds together well, but on this wall, that's loosely compacted, almost junk, so you couldn't extract a large stone from this area. It would just crumble into pieces as it's doing here at the base.
Brain with a muscle.
Because look, if it is just a matter of size, it will be muscle. إنما في precision, في precise work done. Giants cannot do precise work. Highest and delicate. Not only physical.
Diego. Mucho gusto, amigo. Gaúcho. Mi amigo grande. Thanks, buddy. Hope you're doing well, man.
Because as Alex said, from an engineering standpoint, it's more difficult because you think this is going to slide down as you cut it. Yeah. So it's more difficult, but they had a reason for doing it.
When rock sedimentates, there's magnetic alignments in the rock as it sedimentates.
Almost to the same angle.
Yes, yes.
We're looking at almost exactly the same angle of the unfinished opening.
And it's so great when we work as a team. You know, everybody puts it in.
Yeah,
It's just incredible.
yeah.
That's what the Kemet School is. It's a living book.
So this is another massive block of at least 1,000 tons as I crawl uphill in the quarry across the street. Of course, the whole thing was a quarry. And you can see where later cultures were trying to cut smaller pieces from the mega block. And it is possible that originally it was part of this massive limestone outcrop and then was cut and fell in its present position. But the question from there is, why did the work stop? Why did they not manage to either break it into pieces or move it, as they did 3 others, to the actual site of Baalbek, which is at least a mile or 2 in that direction? And there's a local story that the reason that the Romans built this massive structure here was to show their wealth and power, but that story was probably made up by the Romans. So we're at the site of Baalbek itself,
Go up there so we can.
and this is where we have the transition between manageable and these, which are huge.
Smaller pieces helping the pressure to reduce the pressure from the big ones. Yes, exactly. Yes. So it's the same. Yeah, the same pressure relief. زي اللي بنشوفها ايه في
Now this column is polished so smooth and so round, and this curved transition between the curve and the flat is so amazing. It's highly unlikely that this could be done with hand tools, because any sculptor, no matter how good they are, would tend to make a mistake of a dip or a bump. And even after thousands of years, there are no dips and bumps. And this edge, what's left of it, is very sharp. That gives us very strong evidence of the possibility of ancient machining technology. And now we're going to get Stephen Mailer's opinion about the finish on this piece of syenite
Cyanide
stone.
granite. Obviously from Aswan, there are no granite quarries in all of Lebanon. And here's a perfect, smooth polish still on the stone, just like we see at Aswan.
Yeah.
And this is obviously from ancient Kemet.
And it's obviously, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do that by hand, because you're your hand is feeling that that would be a perfect circle.
Perfect radius too, perfect arc radius, so it has to be machined.
Now, the Greeks and the Romans were able to do very beautiful work, as we can see here. You see that carving, gorgeous. But in general, they were only able to do that kind of work in either limestone or alabaster. When it comes to a material as hard as granite or syenite, which is what many of these columns are, the hardness of the stone, because of the crystal content and other minerals, is about 7 on what's called the Mohs scale, with the greatest or hardest stone that we know of being diamond at 10. So it's highly unlikely that they were capable of doing this fine, yet perfectly smooth surfaces in the granite or syenite. And the later cultures also were not able very well to work with that material, so we're left with no choice but to look at the idea that an even older culture was here that had forms of technology not available to the Greeks, the Romans, or indeed the dynastic Egyptians. And it's like in Peru and Egypt, we see obvious evidence of lost ancient high technology at work, such as this column here. Again, this is granite or syenite, and it is, by feel at least, a perfect circle in a very hard stone. So a site like this at Baalbek, you really have to decode it. It is so huge and so complicated because of the different cultures involved in its construction and the fact that it's been ruined by later cultures, which is typical. Almost anywhere you go in the world, you find someone built something fantastic, the next culture maybe nurtured it and added on, and then barbarians of some kind come along and just like nuke most of the site and then use it as a quarry. But if we look really carefully, we're seeing definite megalithic, high-tech, lost ancient technology elements here.
Would you like to take a group picture? Let's take a group picture, please. Janet, group picture in Balzac. Touristic picture.
no, this is what the Abu Ghraib. Abu Ghraib is calcite. And the gears are on the outside. This is Roman. No, the Roman. Such a beautiful story. I'd love to have an altar that's made of this.
I'd like to have a lot of things. I will show you the other one because it's in the exit, the one we found in the station.
Hi, this is Brian Forrester, and today we're exploring ancient Teotihuacan, located about 2 hours from Mexico City. The origins of this place, to be honest, are unknown. We began our adventure in an ancient cave that has been used for at least 1,000 years. And here we did a ritual with some Nahuatl or Aztec-speaking people. This involved incense and obsidian. And again, this was a complete surprise to our guests, and this was an event arranged by my wife, Irene, in order to add a spiritual aspect to our exploration. So once the ritual was completed, we walked back out of this ancient cave and began our study of anomalies that we could see at ancient Teotihuacan. The name itself comes from the Aztec, and the Aztec named it, and what that word means is the place where men became gods. As you can see, Teotihuacan is a huge complex, and the first place that we went to was the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. Now look at the first 3 courses of stairs, and notice that they're relatively large blocks of basalt that fit very tightly together, and yet the stairs above are composed of smaller pieces of stone. Whether this was from the restoration in the 20th century or repair work done by the Aztec is unknown. But again, you can see in this video clip very large blocks of basalt. And the hardest material that the Aztec had for shaping stone was in fact basalt. So this makes it very much an anomaly. Also notice the very rough stonework on the left-hand side and above as compared to the staircase. The sculpted heads were done by the Aztec
Puerto Rican Ashley,
to
what's up?
represent Quetzalcoatl and also Tlaloc, the rain god, but they were likely megalithic blocks that were reshaped by the Aztec.
I'm doing well, thank you.
Now, common thought
How are you?
is that Teotihuacan was constructed 2,000 years ago.
I remember you followed when I was playing the
Academics don't
acoustic
know
guitar.
who the original builders were.
in
As we
that
see
park
the
in Miami.
extent and the size of this construction, it again is very much a mystery. Also notice here
Fucking 3,000 miles north or whatever. 2,000 miles north.
the rough fill. This is restoration in modern times, but the origin of the even cut blocks again is unknown. Here again we see rough restoration done in the 20th century, but here once again notice these basalt steps. They fit together very tightly without mortar, and each one is a different shape and size in comparison to the relative rubble that you saw on the right-hand side. Now we're in the main complex of Teotihuacan, and we're looking at the Temple of the Moon, which is the second largest of the so-called pyramids. And also notice all of these other smaller pyramids.
Thank you, that's so sweet. Thanks, dudes. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys and gal. Guy and gal. Thank
Once
you.
again, Teotihuacan is vast in scale.
Yeah, strong. Yeah, I've been.
By the original builders.
I did a workout
then the
earlier
Toltec,
this week. I did two
and then the
thanks
Aztec found
workouts
Teotihuacan
in
when they
YouTube.
were moving towards what would become their
He
capital
does
city
hanging.
of Tenochtitlan, which means the place of prophecy, from their ancestral home called Aztlan, which some people believe could be Atlantis, but whether that's a fact or not is completely unknown. This is the famous Avenue of the Dead, and it is approximately 1 mile long, stretching from the Temple of the Moon to the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, way in the background. And now we're walking towards the largest of the so-called pyramids. This is the Temple of the Sun, huge in terms of scale. I believe the footprint is larger than that of the Great Pyramids of Giza. So here you see the sense of scale. The tiny humanoid figures, or people walking up and down the steps, in comparison to the huge size of the pyramid itself. Beautifully bilaterally symmetrical. How this was achieved, again, is unknown, and who made it originally is unknown. So now we're going to walk towards the front of the Temple of the Sun, and you're going to see more anomalies in terms of the stonework as we approach. As you can see, most of the stonework is relatively small volcanic stone with volcanic ash used as a type of mortar. But as we approach, you're going to see once again much larger blocks of basalt that are almost scattered around. We don't know where their original positions were, and I suspect that this stonework is much, much older than the pyramid itself. And here again a view of the large basalt stones, likely reshaped, at least the fronts of, during Aztec times. And curiously, a door that goes into the pyramid. Is this part of a tunnel system? We don't know because the door is locked. And once again, large blocks of basalt in comparison to the much smaller stones of much rougher composition. Some of the basalt blocks you can see have been interlocked into the structure. And again, whether this was done during restoration in the 20th century or whether this is Aztec reconstruction is presently unknown. So it appears that Teotihuacan shows
Thanks,
evidence
Puerto Rican Ashley.
of
I
lost
appreciate
ancient
it.
high
I
technology.
am with my
In
girlfriend
the
still.
other videos I'm going to be making
I know I
about
changed
our
my
recent
profile
trip
picture, but I
February
am
of
still
2019, you'll see other
with my
examples
girlfriend.
of
I do
anomalies
appreciate
in terms of
being
construction.
here. I really
Very
do.
fine work, as compared
I mean, I
to
will stand up and do like the
rougher
workouts
work.
as usual, you know, but like
And here again in
I
this
won't do
staircase,
what she
notice
won't be
the
comfortable with.
nicely shaped blocks and then some
Thank
broken.
you.
Clearly
I'm so
the
honored.
staircase
I'm
has
so
been
happy. I'm so
reassembled.
blessed. I'm lucky. What's up, Baron?
So, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you are a subscriber. This, of course, is a quadcopter view. Unfortunately, I was caught by the police
I am very
and
honored.
given a reprimand for filming. But I'm hoping to return to Mexico once a year, probably in January,
Sorry,
February
when
of
I
each
miss
year,
someone, I'm
with
sorry.
a
I don't
tour group,
flirt. I
and you can
don't.
join us at hiddeninkatours.com. Hi, this is
Sorry.
Brian Forster of
I'm honored.
hiddeninkatours.com, and today we're exploring Tula, which is a site
Really
outside
lucky.
of Mexico City. Tula rose in between the fall of Teotihuacan and the rise of Tenochtitlan, which was the Aztec capital. And Tula is most famous for what are called the Atlantean warriors, so that is more or less what this video is going to focus on. But we're also going to see possible evidence
Yeah, new profile picture,
of
man.
lost ancient high technology,
I mean, that's really
or at least megalithic
that's really who I am,
construction,
dude.
such as this
I'm really just
pile
literally
of very
someone who's
large
like,
basalt slabs you see
look what I can do
on the left-hand side of the screen.
Like everything I do
Now we're going up to
is just some
see
sort of like weird
carving that
like
was
dance
done
like charade
during
like,
Toltec
hey, look what I
times.
can do.
See the red pigment
And like that's
is
not
the
my life.
original work, and
And
the
I'm like
grayer
accepting,
stone
you know what?
is more recent
Yeah,
restoration.
that's just who I am.
And this is the main structure, or so-called
You know,
temple.
like it's really
Notice it's relatively
at the
crude
base of
construction
everything.
out
That's
of
what it is.
volcanic stone with volcanic
It's me
ash
going,
used
look what I can
as
do.
a type of mortar. And of course, this
Thanks,
site
man.
has been heavily restored in more recent times. So, in front, what we're looking at is another part of the complex. But now, what we're looking at is some square pillars. Notice again, very rough construction with a sort of covering made out of probably volcanic ash or other material. And now we're going up the staircase. The important thing to look at the stairs is you will see uneven construction. You see very nicely cut slabs of stone and then much rougher pieces put in. This, of course, again, was restored in modern times, but it's the difference between the beautifully flat surfaces and the other broken pieces, which I find quite fascinating. But the main feature are the
These statues are
so-called
crazy.
Atlantean
But
warriors.
I think they put them in the wrong
And
order.
these,
Look, they rebuilt them, but
thought
they
by
built them
some
poorly.
being held in the hands as being a weapon, like a laser or
I
something.
don't think they were. I don't
That's
think
what
they
some
were.
UFO
found
authors
broken.
believe. However, there's a more pragmatic explanation which we were taught by local people, and that's that in the left hand are held short arrows, and the right hand is a kind of small crossbow made out of wood and probably rubber. And at the top you see the headdress.
But my dude, lifting weights.
Here in the
Gonna
back,
do a workout.
square columns. Again, the surfaces are very well done.
Going out with my
rough surface carving.
my
So is it
darling later
possible
on tonight.
that
My girlfriend. So that'd be nice.
Tula is much,
Yeah, I'm gonna
much
lift some
older
weights for the next
and was
few
simply
hours.
adopted by the
I'm
Toltec
gonna go
people
slow.
who reconstructed
Take
it.
my time. Add an extra weight.
Once again, the so-called
20
laser
more pounds.
weapons in the right hand,
Oh,
and
thank
what
you,
the
Ashley.
headdresses
That's very nice.
represent
Thank you.
at the top are
Appreciate it.
feathers, and then below that a band
Yeah,
around
I
the
just
warrior's
needed
head.
to say that at
So
the
again, a
start
local
because I
expert
mean,
told us
Twitch is
that
such
these
a
are not
spectrum.
Atlantean warriors,
On one end, I
but
mean,
in
I
fact
support it all. I
warriors
support free
of
speech
the
for everything.
god
But like on one end, you have like,
Quetzalcoatl.
which I support. There's been streams of me
So that's
supporting
why
like
it's important
Amaranth.
to get local information
She was just
rather
like,
than
you know,
necessarily
she goes to
works by authors from foreign countries, so
puppy
of course it's all
adoption
important
centers
to look at.
and plays with
The
puppies
idea
as they get
that these
adopted by
are
people in real
Atlantean
time and
warriors,
streams it, which is amazing.
is an idea that
was
And then she does the
formulated in the 18th or 19th
the
century
pool.
by a foreign author.
Pool
The
expose.
name has stuck to this very day.
The hot tub.
And here you can see the landscape around Tula.
This is a big
There's a
extreme
ball
on
court
Twitch, and I
in the
just like.
background, which of course the Maya and Olmec people had.
Yeah, I do show my arms.
And it is a relatively small site. It's nothing in comparison to Teotihuacan, which is the huge complex
You're right,
with
maybe
the
it's
Sun
my fault.
Temple, the Moon Temple, or Pyramid so-called, and also the Temple or Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl.
Maybe I should wear a
But if
t-shirt.
you're in this part of Mexico, it's well worth
Oh,
visiting.
I'm so sorry,
The stone
Ashley.
is basalt. Some of it
But
is
hey,
restoration.
I'm sorry, whatever
and our
happened.
local guide told us that the quarry is probably
he was a jerk.
25 kilometers away.
I
So
don't
that's
know.
quite a
Sorry.
distance to move
It's
these
just
relatively
heavy. It just
large
sucks. It
pieces
just-
of stone, but not insurmountable by ancient
Obviously, I'm
people.
sorry that you have to go through that bullshit,
Here
but
again, you
obviously
see
it's
other
always gonna be
pyramidal
better. So I'm not
structures
sorry
in
that
the
it's
area.
like that it happened. You know what I mean?
And this is video
You know what I mean?
3
Unless you
of
didn't
a
want it to happen.
10-part series filmed in Mexico in February of 2019.
Thanks for opening
If you
your
have
heart
not,
and sharing
please
that.
subscribe to my YouTube channel and share this video
It's a lot of
and
courage.
my 1,000 plus others. Hi, this is Brian Forster, and what you're looking at below that church in the background is the largest
Well, you have a great personality,
pyramidal
Ashley.
site
So I'm
or
sure.
pyramid, quote
I'm
unquote,
sure you'll be
on
okay.
the planet.
Happy.
It's
Yeah,
the Great
exactly.
Pyramid of
Yeah,
Cholula,
exactly.
also known as
What? What are you talking about? Dick?
which
Enjoy
is
it,
the
man.
Aztec
Enjoy it.
language meaning made by hand mountain. And it's the largest archaeological site in the New World.
Yeah, you're happy.
as well as
Exactly.
the
I'm
largest
like, as
pyramidal
soon as I said you have
structure
you're a
known
great
to
personality,
exist in
and the
the
first
world
two words I
today.
read were "I'm happy." I'm like, damn, yes.
The pyramid is a
More powerful.
temple that traditionally has been
Neat.
viewed as having been
Single.
dedicated to the god Quetzalcoatl. And what we're doing is here exploring inside the pyramid itself, because the pyramid was constructed over a long period of time and is at least 4, if not 7, pyramidal structures, one built on top
Yeah,
of
that's
another.
like if you've
According to
if you're
sources,
able
the
to
temple
be
pyramid complex was built in 4
happy
stages, starting
with yourself
from
by yourself,
the 3rd
not
century
like always,
BC through the 9th
but
century
then you're
AD.
able to one just live a happier,
So
truer
that
life,
is
and 2
approximately, that's more than
meet
1,000
someone where
years
your
of
goals are more
construction.
aligned and everything's just better. And
And
just a
the
better person.
excavations were done in the 1930s to expose the core or inner structure of the pyramid. There you can see a
Oh.
staircase leading down.
Yeah,
And in total, 8
I'm
kilometers
sorry about that,
of
but that's
a
it's.
tunnel were produced in order to reveal
I recommend
the layers of
don't
the
fall for that
core.
trap. Obviously, Christmas is very
And the material itself
special
seems
meaning,
to
ethereal,
be a type of volcanic
astrological,
ash.
and if you ask my opinion,
There once
just
again
the time
is another
of,
one of the staircases
Sagittarius
going
turning
down.
into
And it is a total
Capricorn is
volume
such a
of
massive
4.45
shift in
million
energy.
cubic meters, which is larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza in
Of
Egypt,
one of
which is about
stardom to
2.5
family.
million cubic meters. The
and
Great Pyramid of Giza
structure
is 138.8
growth
or meters
and
high, or
finance
555 feet,
and generosity.
whereas the pyramidal structure at Cholula is not as high, but the footprint is absolutely massive.
But
And
yeah,
only
sorry
parts
about
of the
that.
exterior have been excavated, which we're going to see after we go through this rather massive tunnel system. At its peak, Cholula
Yeah,
had
you
a
don't want to rush into it. Yo, what's up,
population of about
Chev?
100,000 people.
From India. Hell yeah.
Once again, you see more of the
Fucking
tunnel
around the
system
world,
there.
man. You tuning in from India makes this
And relatively
stream
soon we'll be getting to the end.
intraglobal. and
Most of the
really
tunnel
cool.
system is locked away from the public, but I believe we walked at least 2 kilometers
Yes, Castro.
from the
Yes.
main entrance. The main entrance at Cholula is the tunnel
I
itself,
got it.
which is really
How to quote this?
quite fascinating.
Yes. Oh, I can't.
And we walked and walked
Like,
and
that's-
saw
yes.
exposed areas of different layers, like you can see here. And there.
Chef. Dev. I'll
And
leave.
here the inner
I don't want
workings.
to dox you.
So it's quite a labyrinth. Again, you're allowed to see approximately 2 kilometers of the tunnel
All
system.
my fans are from India. Yes,
but
that's one
it
too.
is at least 8 kilometers, if not possibly even 10 kilometers long. Once again, you see some of the inner parts of the earlier construction, smaller pyramidal level.
Tunnels. Yeah, this is
And
insane.
on
This
and
is
on
in.
it
This is inside
goes.
Teotihuacan. This looks exactly like Aztec Double O, man.
Thankfully, the
I'm telling you,
lighting is
dude.
quite good in here.
The people at Rare
And
were like
after
megalith.
2
They may have been
kilometers,
descendants of
we
those that
reached the
built
outside,
Stonehenge.
and now we're going to explore the exterior areas that
But
have
yeah,
been
Ashley, you know, it's I'm sorry.
excavated.
Like, you'll be okay.
in
There's you
recent
don't need to rush out and
Most of
chase
the excavations have been done
no it
in the
hurts
20th century.
or whatever. But yeah,
Here you can see just how massive Cholula
Whatever. You don't have to
is.
listen to me.
Again, that church is on the very top of the pyramidal
my
structure.
suggestion.
Most of it is overgrown with trees and bushes. But here we see some exposed areas, and you can see relatively small stonework used for this
Apparently they had
staircase,
red
for
hair,
example.
Dick.
And you have a mix of materials. You have limestone, which is the lighter colored material.
Brian Forster
and then
thinks they're
some
aliens because they
volcanic
have
rock, which is
elongated
the more
skulls and
reddish.
yellow, reddish hair.
Since it was constructed over the course of more than
I
a
think it's
thousand
like
years
aliens.
by different cultures, that's obviously why
Like
you
the
have
ones
different
in
types
Indiana Jones
of
and the Crystal
construction
Skull.
techniques. Some rather inferior,
That's
and others quite
Quetzalcoatl,
fine.
is always with red hair.
As always, what I'm looking for are possible evidences of much more ancient megalithic work, and that is what we're going to be able to see near the end of this video.
See?
So once again, relatively rough construction work, smallest stones with clay or even volcanic ash mortar. Here we have a stela, which is evidence of Mayan influence.
Okay, I'm gonna start. I
There's
think
also
I'm gonna
evidence of Olmec influence, which is older than Maya. There, a very well-made staircase of smaller stones. Interesting looking depressions. Maybe those were for acoustic properties, because we did notice that if you clapped your hands, there was an echo that was created inside this ceremonial
lifting
area
Toby's-
here.
Yeah, that's actually really good. That's like
And
an
here
amazing
you
quote.
can see the exterior is the limestone, and then the core of volcanic stone. So the volcanic stone is from the area where the limestone came from. I was not able to find out. But this is the part that actually intrigues me the most, because you can see that this is very finely constructed. And if you look at the darker stone, that is basalt, whereas the lighter stone is a basalt type of rock as well, but that's
Yes.
evidence of 20th century reconstruction.
63. I think I'm gonna remember that. I think I'm gonna be.
So
saying
this, I
for a lot.
believe, is actually the oldest part and the finest in terms of construction. Notice the staircase, the stones are quite a bit smaller than the larger stones you see on the right. Stones on the right very finely fitting together, whereas the staircase is made of smaller
How
stones with
steep that
volcanic
is.
ash
That's crazy,
as
man.
a type of mortar. Hi,
Those
this is
tunnels
Brian
are crazy.
Forster, and today we're going to be looking at megalithic evidence at Mitla, located in Oaxaca in Mexico. So you can already see the evidence. You see this massive
Oh yeah, this
column
guy.
of basalt.
Forster, I love you,
Supposedly
Forster,
the
but
quarry
he's
is
such a
located
boomer. He's got his.
more or less a mile
He doesn't turn
in
off
the
the dings of his
distance. We were
messages.
able to actually explore
So
the area
on his
of
like
the quarry,
20-minute videos, you just hear all these
we're able
things.
to indeed
It's just so ridiculous.
establish that the stone
It's
is
just
basalt.
so easily avoidable.
Now, this is going to be in contrast with the other types of construction that we're going to look at. Again,
Okay, I think I'm gonna start.
another large basalt column. So here at the bottom, you see finely cut and well-fitted stone and much rougher work above it. There in the background, you see those massive lintels. And then here again, rough construction. And then once again, fine work at the bottom. And here, very tight-fitting basalt stone.
Yeah, buddy, the
No
Kailasa
mortar,
temple.
no gaps whatsoever, and much rougher work above. So we're obviously looking at two different civilizations. And in the case of the church, which we'll be filming in a moment, 3 levels of construction, 3 different cultures. So look how tight-fitting these stones are. Again, no mortar whatsoever. And this is the church. So the upper work is Spanish colonial, and then lower down, recycled stones from a megalithic structure. And here you see a very nicely shaped basalt stone, more or less rubble above. And this is crude construction. So you have the megalithic work, and then you have the Zapotec native people's work, and then you have the Spanish colonial work above. So here, the rough construction of the colonial and Zapotec people, and then the reinstalling of these very large lintels or beams, in this case weighing at least 6 tons. Now some people are going to say that the finest work would be the beams and that would be the last level of construction, but likely not true. It is possible that even with a 6-ton beam, and you don't have to be that sophisticated, that you could pry up one end, put some rubble and stone below, then gently raise the other side a little bit, and almost do like a seesaw fashion to build the wall up, having the recycled beam in the place you want it at the very end. Once again, relative rubble below.
Yeah, like this is not
There
impressive
are a
compared
series
to
of
the
passages
Kailasa
here
temple.
at Mitla. So again, we're going to see the difference between Zapotec style, which is here, and possibly colonial, and then another one of these massive, conservatively.
We'll come back to this video. It's a good video, but we'll come back to it. Oh no. If the documentary sucks, I'm going to change it to something else.
There's a place in India that rewrites everything we think about ancient cultures in that region of the world. Perched in a remote crag high on top of a mountain, an entire hillside has been carved, removed, and designed to such a degree of accuracy and expertise, it's not only confounded historians,
so these are the
it's
caves.
become the
This isn't
benchmark
it
case
yet.
for advanced ancient
This is
technology in the
beside
region.
what we're going
Why?
to.
The concept of carving 100 caves into a mountain is extreme, yes. It's a colossal project, and
this.
there's zero quarry
Look at this.
material
This
anywhere to
is
be
insane.
found. The
That was a
intricacy
one
looks like
piece
a
of
modern
rock.
3D model, yet its 3-story scale
Like,
is
it's so
literally
insane.
larger than life.
Like it's
Set in an ancient epoch, paying homage to the ancient Hindu epic of Ramayana, it leaves anyone who sees this place utterly fascinated. The Kailasa Cave, with its boring academic label of Cave Number 16, may be the most famous one there. But of the 34 examples known to the public, they all hold mystery and surprise. Let us look at some of the puzzling questions of the Ajanta and Ellora cave system while we can. Archaeology is closing this place off indefinitely, leaving locals and pilgrims of the entire globe furious. Ajanta is some 50 miles from Ellora, but they're usually considered together as in concept and era of construction. Maharashtra, India may not be the easiest place to get to. India's temples and historic sites are numerous and scattered. Yet in this remote part of India, those who persevere are rewarded with the magnificent Ellora Caves. The scale of this rock temple cave complex, one of the biggest in the world, is mind-boggling. The site features over 100 caves, although only 34 of which are open to the public. The Kailasa Temple, Cave 16, is considered one of the most remarkable in the world. What makes Kailasa unique is its sheer size, delicate architecture, and the fact that it was carved out of a single stone. Kailasa Cave is dedicated to Shiva, the god of creation and destruction, and devout pilgrims come from all over India and the world to see the living mythology encased in stone. This impressive freestanding multi-story complex covers a region more than double the Parthenon in Athens. A whopping 3 stories high, it's also double the height of the Parthenon temple, like a living megalith carved out of rock. Investigations show it could only have been constructed by excavating from the top down. The sheer quantity of material that would have to be removed for this is enormous, nowhere to be seen anywhere in the region, and took more labor than carving the monument. Like other temples, it has an entranceway, a main temple surrounded by numerous shrines. Then there's the problem with the carvings. Such elaborate, ornate, and intricate carvings took time, a lot of time. With the quarrying of the main structure, this was an immense building project. The time frame suggested to build this by academia is simply ludicrous. The material quarried from the rooms is nowhere to be seen either. Academia in India is no different to the rest of the world. Historians feel the responsibility to answer engineering questions. Laughable notions of construction or lack of interest ensues, whilst engineers point enigmas are thus largely ignored.
It's like perfect.
There are so many unanswered questions regarding this place, it's been sectioned off and controlled, leaving only 1/3 visible to the public, and now it's going to be completely sealed off. When you talk numbers and statistics of the Ellora Caves, even the historians cringe at their ineptitude. The only time an entire mountain has been carved up like this is the Ajanta and Ellora Caves architecture. If you take the entire rock-cut churches of Ethiopia, they would fill a small section. If the Valley of the Kings rock-cut tombs, albeit they're spread out in distance, but the volume would fit inside Ajanta and Ellora. Simply speaking, this is the largest single monolithic rock excavation in the world, with over 220,000 tons of basaltic rock painstakingly removed, and nowhere to be seen. 3 million cubic feet of stone missing in action somewhere. Although an incredible feat of engineering, with an artistic perfection yet to be paralleled, this inexplicable place is one of the best examples of ancient advanced technology, in an era that's not supposed to ancient technology. This has led to wild theories of construction, everything from the mundane to aliens. Whilst the alien hypothesis is fun to explore, it ignores the Hindu aspect blindly. The entire monument is a shroud to the Ramayana classic. The Ramayana is an ancient Indian epic composed at a minimum in the 5th century BCE. The classic tale tells a story of exile and return of Rama, the Prince of Ayodhya. Originally composed in Sanskrit by the sage Valmiki, it was later taught to Rama's twin sons, Lava and Kush. It is a Hindu monument carved with inscriptions to say so, depicting Hindu mythology scenes. Saying aliens built it not only detracts from the monument's sculptors, it's a primary reason the public access is being removed. Which brings us to who built the monuments. Even keeping an open mind on aliens, it's more of a question of when. There are conflicting reports from mainstream academia on when they were built, sometimes being out by between 500 and 1,000 years. The only thing we know is that there are many eras of inscription, some utilizing Sanskrit. It's the returning concept. Are these heirlooms from a golden age? Stone cannot be dated, and multiple graffiti from different eras explain nothing other than several people claimed heritage to the Hindu monument, and proudly so. From an advanced engineering perspective, how was this accomplished whatever era it was built? The amount of pre-planning, let alone carving, is advanced itself. Advanced knowledge of engineering is one thing, and it's the advanced engineers of today that point out mathematics was essential to do this. Mere suggestions of this to the historians who control the site sparks huge arguments. There are also certain spots in the cave complex in which a human cannot fit through. How the stone was quarried is completely unknown. Where the quarried stone is remains yet another mystery. There are no signs of any of it in the surrounding region at all. We know it was not used in any of the construction of temples. One amazing feat is a giant pillar at Kailasa, which stands over 100 feet tall, and is also created by carving out everything around it. Unlike the traditional method, it's an astounding spectacle everyone marvels at. The mainstream archaeology hypothesis is that the complex was constructed in the 7th century using basic tools such as iron chisels and hammers. Also speculated that it only took a mere 18 years to create this. Considering the entire complex, it's difficult to believe the basic removal of stone by rough quarrying alone would have taken longer than that estimate. It's laughable even with modern technology or heavy machinery. This is not to mention the cutting of the structures, the decorative carvings, and a finesse of stairways and multiple passages. The math just doesn't add up to creating something this unique, intricate, and lavish. You would need an immense workforce, highly trained and labor-intensive, with a support network. Another mysterious feature often overlooked at the site are the tunnels and passageways that go nowhere. Legends of a vast underground city underneath the Kailasa temple are the supposed reason for this mystery passages. There's no doubt these ancient structures are significant achievements of advanced engineering, art, and craftsmanship. Of the many inscriptions found there, a lot go back as far as the 7th century, yet none claim to be the original builders. So who on earth were the original builders of the Ellora caves in India? We may not be able to exactly answer that, but we do know it was not built by ancient humans with chisels and hammers. If all these structures were built by scooping out rocks from mountains, where did all the removed rocks go? Why do historians ignore the missing material? This insanely puzzling fact is that even if you search the Ellora Caves region, you won't find any large piles of rocks or quarried material. There are no routes for quarried material transported away. The archaeologists have determined what you see in the Ellora finished product is 34 unique structures, each one created by scooping material from the mountains. To those not familiar, Ellora does not possess any natural caves. The mountains had to be converted into artificial caves. Running with conventional theories, if human beings did
I'm nervous. I went up 20 pounds on the bar.
There should be a mountain of debris equal to the rocks of an entire mountain. The Kailasa temple and all the space that is empty was originally made of rocks, which we know they were scooped out. The amount of rock scooped out is more than the amount of rock that's still standing. Of the 34 structures, the amount of rock removed outweighs the amount of rock that's visible. We could build a structure larger than the Ellora Caves if it still existed. In modern-day earth moving, you can see huge piles of rocks left over even for smaller, simpler projects. How much missing material are we talking about? In just
That's way
Kailasa
too fucking
Temple
heavy.
alone, historians estimate that over 380,000 tons of rock are missing. And this is only one temple. Quantifying the missing material for 34 temples is mind-boggling. Let's not forget only 34 temples are visible to the public. There are over 100, but getting to see the rest, you'd have to do a PhD in history to gain access. Conservative estimates put the entire volume of missing rock in the region of 3 million cubic meters. This is not a small problem. You could build the Pyramid of Giza easily with the material and still have 1 million cubic meters left over. Bizarrely, modern construction workers doing a project near the caves brought rocks from a quarry over 100 miles away. Whilst this might seem laughable, it really does embody the enigma. Something mysterious happened here. An advanced method or machinery was certainly going. Think the Giza Pyramid evaporating into thin air, and you get it. Archaeologists and historians are completely baffled because it's beyond the impossible whether they accept it or not. Amazingly, few people indulge into the context of the carvings for answers. It's usually a case of ignorance or blame it on ancient astronauts. Yet the very context of the carvings speaks of high ancient advanced technology. We can only imagine what kind of technology utilized. Ancient Indian texts mention quite numerous devices used by gods which could create structures like this without leaving any debris behind. Whether these texts are true accounts of history or not, one amazing fact is very clear. Ellora Caves were not created by human beings with simple chisels and hammers. It was conceptually created by a far more advanced civilization than we give credit, with a vastly superior technology we have yet to figure out. The fact that the Indian epics that speak of all this are carved on the walls subject matter should scream for attention. If we get our hands on the secret underground city of the Ellora Caves, there may well be answers down there. Ajanta. If we travel a little farther afield to the nearby Ajanta Caves, often associated with Ellora, despite being a whopping 40 miles away. Unlike Ellora, they were lost to history for several hundred years and then rediscovered by a British army captain in the 19th century. They survive relatively unspoiled, with their intricate chiseled shrines and murals still fresh considering their immense age. Ajanta has a unique selling point. It possesses exquisite, extraordinarily detailed wall paintings. The Ajanta Caves are well hidden
for this TED Talk. But I'm not spinning any tales today. I'm going to be presenting before you facts based on science and history. And I'm going to leave you to take everyone's familiar with him. But did you know that there is absolutely no archaeological evidence to prove that Alexander the Great existed? That's not in your history books. Everything we know about this man comes from the writings by 3 historians who lived between 150 and 400 years after Alexander died: Strabo, Arrian, and Plutarch. But Alexander is not mythology, he is history. So I'm going to explore some unanswered questions from the Mahabharata, which I've been researching now for about 12 years. And I'm not going to give you answers, but I'm going to give you some thoughts, which I hope will challenge you to be curious about what could be and what is. Here's the first question. Did the Mahabharata actually happen? The events in the Mahabharata, which is not just the Kurukshetra war, that's just 8,800 shloks out of the 1 lakh shloks in the Mahabharata. But did all the events described there, did it happen? It's a very common question. The fantastic weapons we hear about in the Mahabharata, did they actually exist? And if they did, how did these people over 5,000 years ago have that kind of science and technology? And then the question that led me on my journey as a fiction writer, are there scientific explanations for some of the things that we read about in the Mahabharata? This is a big one which I'm actually currently researching. Were there giants in the time of the Mahabharata? We hear about the Devs and the Asuras and the Rakshasas, these enormous beings of gigantic stature. Were they real? Let's explore this. But I'm going to start by taking you on a tour of the world. We're going to talk about some unexplained mysteries from across the world and then come back to the Mahabharata. And I'm going to start with Egypt. The Great Pyramid is one of the most famous monuments in the world. It is 457 feet high as it stands today, the equivalent size of a 45-story building. We are told by history books that it was built in about 2550 BC by a pharaoh called Khufu as a tomb for himself. Now, when the Great Pyramid was built, it was locked, and this is its original entrance, which was only discovered maybe about 50 or 60 years ago. It was concealed, hidden away by the wall of rock, which you can see is scattered around the entrance today. So no one could enter the pyramid after it was built. It was closed and sealed. In 800 AD, the governor of Cairo, a gentleman called Muhammad al-Mamun, he decided he wanted to go inside. Why? Because he believed if a pharaoh was great enough to build a 45-story tomb for himself, he must have a lot of treasure inside. So Al-Mamun and his men tunneled into the Great Pyramid using what is today called the robber's entrance. Tourists enter the Great Pyramid today using this entrance. But to his great shock and disappointment, when they reached inside, they found absolutely nothing. The walls were bare, no inscriptions. Unlike all the Egyptian tombs you discover, there were no inscriptions on the walls. There was no mummy and there was no treasure. He must have been a very sad man. Now you can see the lower hole is the robber's entrance. The upper one is the original entrance. So you can see what I'm talking about. A close-up of these. What's also very interesting about the Great Pyramid is the maze of passages and tunnels inside. And you can see, if this was built as a tomb, they'd have had one heck of a time carrying the pharaoh's body up these passages, because none of them are in a straight line. They're all at crazy angles. Let's look at some of the angles. Look at the Grand Gallery. Now this has a ramp today, which you can see at the base of the photograph. This ramp enables us to climb it, but when it was explored about 150 years ago, there was no ramp, and you can see how difficult it is to walk by yourself. Forget about carrying a corpse with you. The tunnels, most of these tunnels that I showed you, the network of tunnels, most of them are about 2.5 to 3 feet in height, like this one over here and this one over here, which means you have to crawl on your hands and knees to get through them. Not a great job if you're carrying a pharaoh's mummy around. So the question really is, why? Why was this 45-story building built 5,000 years ago, locked away with all these passages, 3 chambers, and interestingly, tunnels from the king's chamber that opened up to the sky, like this. This is where it opens up in the north face of the pyramid. And from the queen's chamber, there are 2 tunnels which were explored about 15 years ago, and this is a National Geographic capture where you can see the tunnels are blocked. So why build them? Unanswered. Lots of speculation, but I'm not into speculation today. The Sphinx is another great, it's a fabulous mystery. So we are told that the Sphinx was built by the pharaoh Khafre, who was Khufu's son, and therefore built about 2500 BC. And for a very long time, this was accepted history. You can see how big the Sphinx is by looking at the size of the human beings next to it. This is just the shoulder and the neck and the head of the Sphinx. It's an enormous structure. And here's another shot which shows you the size of the Sphinx. Now, in the 1990s, a professor of geology at Boston University, Dr. Robert Schoch. He came along on the scene and asked the Egyptologists a very interesting question. He said, how do you know that the Sphinx was built in 2500 BC? And the fascinating answer was, well, we actually don't know. We think it was built in 2500 BC because you cannot date stone. You date it would be millions of years old, right? So Robert Schoch, being a scientist, said, not good enough for me. I'm going to run some geological tests. And his tests shocked the world because what his tests showed were that the erosion you can see on the Sphinx and on the walls of the enclosure surrounding the Sphinx were caused by heavy rainfall. And we know for a fact it has not rained heavily in Egypt after about 5000 or 6000 BC, which means the Sphinx could not have been built in 2500 BC. It had to be older than 6000 BC, probably even 8, 9, 10,000 BC, we don't know. But it is an old monument. And the question then is, who built it? We were all cavemen and cavewomen in those days, right? We were using stone tools. We didn't have the technology and the science to build a massive structure like this, yet somebody did. Let me take you now to Stonehenge in the United Kingdom. Now, I'd visited this as a tourist about 12 years ago, but only while I was researching for my last book did I actually spend 2 weeks researching this deeply on site. And I discovered something about this that blew my mind. 70-ton blocks of stone put upright, and 70-ton blocks of stones on top. The stones lying flat on top also are 70 tons. The first question is, in 2400 BC, which is the officially accepted date for this, how did they do it? How did they lift these stones 30 feet into the air and put them on top? And there's complex engineering involved here. This is called a mortise-tenon joint in carpentry, modern carpentry, but they obviously knew it. So each of the upright stone has these two projections called tenons. The mortise holes on the stones on top fit onto them so it locks the stone in place. And if you look carefully, there's a tongue and groove joint like a jigsaw puzzle on the sides of the stones. So not only do you have to lift the stones, so one stone fits, that's great. The second stone has to fit the tenon, the mortise-tenon joint has to fit as well as the tongue and groove joint, and you're standing here, putting it 30 feet in the air with possibly only ropes to help you achieve this. In the 1950s, they reconstructed Stonehenge using cranes, but in 2400 BC, they did not have cranes. How did they do this? And you can see the mortise holes. Here's a shot of one of the tenon projections. Here, if you look very carefully, you can see the tongue of a stone on the stone which is flat on top. Let me take you to Wales. This is a fascinating place. When I saw it again, it blew my mind because there are magical things that happen here, and I'll tell you just one of them. This is supposed to be a burial chamber at a place called Bryn Celyn, and the entrance of this chamber faces northeast. So every year, between December and April, the sun rises in the northeast. If you remember your geography, it rises in the northeast in winter in the northern hemisphere. It shines through this entrance and illuminates a stone pillar which is inside the chamber. Now, it's no big deal, right? The interesting thing is that the stone chamber is where the blue line is. It is not in line with the entrance. So obviously, light from the sun is reflecting off the walls of the chamber and illuminating the pillar. And you can see it's reflective. It's quartz-lined rock. Here's the magic. I don't know if you can see, there are grooves cut into the rock. Here's a close-up. You can see it clearly now. So here's what happens. Every day, starting from December, the sun shines in through the passage and illuminates a different notch. Every day, it climbs from the base of the pillar in December to the top of the pillar in April. This, my friends, is a 5,000-year-old calendar. Just by looking at which notch is illuminated, you know the day of the year in winter, right, between December and April. Built in 3000 BC, we are told by the archaeologists. 5,000 years ago, how could they build a parabolic mirror, which is what the walls of the chambers are? How could they do something like this? It's amazing. Unanswered questions. Now, Some very interesting theories were advanced about 20 years ago when I started researching this. One of the pioneers in this is a gentleman called Graham Hancock. And he and other people of his ilk used a lot of science to create a theory saying that there was an ancient global civilization, had advanced science technology, and was washed out by a global flood 12,000 years ago. Interestingly, recent discoveries have actually provided fascinating evidence for this. So in 10,900 BC, we now know a comet hit the Earth. It's shattered into fragments and hit the Earth at different points, which is now marked by what's called the Younger Dryas boundary, and melted the ice cap. The ice age was anyway getting over. Sea levels rose, causing a global flood. Volcanoes erupted, ash filled the atmosphere. There was for 1,300 years, temperatures dropped sharply, as you can see. I'll just show you. These animals in North America went extinct altogether. One of the biggest mysteries until this discovery was made about the comet hitting the Earth was why these animals all disappeared at the same time 12,000 years ago. This is a report from an ice core from the Greenland ice cap, which shows, you can see 15,000 years ago, there's a spike in temperature, the ice age is ending, and then suddenly the temperature plummets to what it was below what it was during the ice age. That is when the comet hit. 1,300 years later, the temperature returns to normal. And another fascinating discovery made in 2008, don't know if you've heard of this. This archaeological team working in Russia in a cave called Denisova discovered a tooth, a big tooth. The surface area of this tooth is about 2.5 times that of our teeth, a human tooth. So they thought this must belong to a large, now extinct animal, like some of the ones I just showed you. And they sent it for DNA testing to try and figure out who it belonged to. Imagine their shock when the DNA tests came back saying that this tooth belonged to a human being, a human species which we did not know existed until this tooth was found. Not Homo sapiens, which is what we are, Homo sapiens sapiens, but they had to give it a new name. They called it the Denisovans. And I'm going to share 3 amazing discoveries which you will find in the scientific reports about the Denisovans over the last 9 years. The first is that all the people living today in the geographical areas covered by the green line, which is quite substantive, all of us have Denisovan DNA. 2.4% of our DNA is Denisovan DNA. This is a fact. The second interesting thing was this bracelet. Now, the Denisovans lived about 30 to 40,000 years ago. This bracelet is about 30 to 40,000 years old. We believe it was made by the Denisovans. And I'm not going to dwell on the beauty of the bracelet, but focus on that small hole at the side of the bracelet, which is 1 millimeter in diameter. Very small, very fine. The scientists who ran physical tests on this hole say that it could have been made, and I quote from the report, it could have been made only using a high-speed drill. Otherwise, the stone would have shattered. A high-speed drill 30,000 years ago. This is also mind-blowing. Just like we have Denisovan DNA, the Denisovans had DNA belonging to another human species which we have not yet discovered. There are still mysteries out there waiting to be solved. There are still discoveries waiting to be made if we are curious enough to challenge our existing beliefs and look for the evidence. Science is opening up the way now. I'm going to now come back to the unanswered questions about the Mahabharata, and I hope I'm going to leave you with thoughts, not answers, but thoughts that will lead you to curiosity to learn more about this. Did the events described in the Mahabharata actually happen? There is absolutely no archaeological evidence to prove that the events of the Mahabharata happened. There is also no archaeological evidence to prove that Alexander the Great existed. Is it possible that the weapons described in the Mahabharata actually existed? Did they have the scientific knowledge to create those kind of weapons? Can there be a scientific basis for some of the things we've described in the Mahabharata? We can't say for sure. What we do know for sure is that 30 to 40,000 years ago, there were people who we didn't know about until now, there were people who had some kind of technology. We don't know what it was, but they did. We know that they had engineering techniques like this one and the one at Bryn Ketlithi to create complex buildings, some of which we cannot do today. We cannot build the Great Pyramid today if we wanted to. The Sushruta Samhita, written in 1000 BC, is a manual on brain surgery, and one of its techniques, called the flap technique of plastic surgery, is still in use today in the 21st century. A 3,000-year-old text. And I found this very interesting while researching this. The Sulba Sutras, written in the first millennium BC, first state what we now know as the Pythagoras theorem. They used geometry, and the square root of 2 is defined. So let me very quickly show you. In those days, in the Vedic age, you had altars. We didn't have temples, we had altars. This is one example. 4 levels, A, B, C, D. Each level had a different type of brick, hence A, B, C, D. 196 bricks. Could not have been made without the use of geometry. This is the Bodhyana Sulba Sutra's definition of the Pythagoras theorem. It is there. And the square root of 2 is pretty close to our modern value. Were they really giants in the Mahabharata? Well, the Denisovans must have been pretty big people. I'm not saying they're the people in the Mahabharata, but it's interesting. So I'm going to end over here, and like I said, I hope I've given you enough to challenge your thoughts and look for more. Thank you.
Oh, that was short. That was short. I was just getting into it, and how Alexander the Great, there was no proof he existed, and all that stuff.
In a horseshoe-styled canyon with a difficult climb to the best ones. Originally, Ellora was elaborately painted, and traces remain, though largely decayed over time. The paint in the deepest caves is still vibrant, illustrious, and exquisite, leaving one wondering how it was done. Oil-filled lamps leave soot on the ceilings, and just like the Egyptian tombs in the Valley of the Kings, what did they use for light, given that the caves are so dark? Scholars usually theorize mirrors and candles, but it just doesn't work. It's assumed Ajanta and Ellora are sister monuments, and the same applies there. Ajanta is no different to Ellora, being sectioned off by the authorities, sparking claims they want access to the underground tunnels. A massive replica of some of them will be available, and that's all people are going to get to see again. Mainstream beliefs that are perpetrated is that the Buddhist monks, with too much spare time on their hands, created this magnificent marvel in the monsoon season. They couldn't travel during that time, so they carved one of the most intricate, technologically advanced, and difficult monuments to exist on the planet. Preposterous as this is, there's zero evidence for this. It was John Smith who, in 1819, chanced upon the horseshoe-shaped rock monument. The entrance to structures intrigued the British official. Soon, archaeological experts explored the sites, with news of discovery spreading like wildfire. Apart from the obvious stunning art and sculptures, there were also huge stupas built, and massive pillars with intricately detailed carvings. Of the over 30 caves in the cave complex, speculation has run riot since day one. One group says part of the complex was developed during the Satvayana period, and the other group says another part was done during the Vakataka period. Historians and archaeologists have assumed for 200 years, based on thin evidence at best, a connection between the Vakataka dynasty that ruled the region to the Gupta dynasty of North India. Just like Ellora, few academics have focused on how it was done, why it was done, and staking their careers on when it was done. It would be like hanging a painting in a castle and determining the age of the castle based on the artist who painted it. We do know the Ajanta caves were built in different phases. The temple caves were abandoned and eventually forgotten through the centuries. The dense forests were partly to be blamed for camouflaging these marvels. Admittedly, the Ajanta caves are home to paintings and sculptures that show a major influence of philosophical teachings of the Buddha. Various incidents from the Jataka tales are represented on the walls. Scenes from the royal court of the era are also painted. Bizarrely, Buddha prohibited sculpting and painting images of him. His philosophy was that life was a process through which one must overcome desires, otherwise you would not attain salvation or nirvana. Buddha's followers obviously didn't follow this primary Buddhist principle. At the entrance of the first of Ajanta caves, there's a huge image of Buddha. The doorway to the cave is decorated with favorable motifs. The caves are over 2,000 years old, and the Buddhist statues that were added were 600 years later than that. Scholars still maintain Buddhism monks were bored in the monsoons, and that's why the Ajanta caves were born. Remarkably, there's an ancient legend among the Hindus of India that tells of a civilization beneath Central Asia. Several underground cities are said to be situated north of the Himalayan mountains, speculated to be in Afghanistan or under the Hindu Kush. The notorious subterranean Shangri-La is inhabited by a race of golden people repeatedly dubbed as the Shining Ones, who seldom surface. They travel to the surface through tunnels that stretch in vast directions. The entrances to these secret tunnels are believed to be hidden in several of the ancient cities of the Orient. There is a consensus in Hinduism that Ellora and the Ajanta caverns possess access to Shangri-La via the Shandor mountain range. The Ajanta caves are only 100 kilometers from the Ellora caves, which contain Hindu and Jain temples as well as Buddhist caves, the last dating from a period like Ajanta. The Ajanta caves are so precisely cut into the side of a cliff, the wildest of theories ensure, the wildest being laser-cut advanced technology. Situated the south side of a U-shaped gorge on the small river Wagora, they are now above a modern pathway spanning the cliff. In ancient times, they were accessed by individual stairs or ladders from the side of the river some 110 feet below. There isn't any known technology on Earth capable to quarry these advanced, precisely detailed temples out of mountains with such surgical precision in the era proposed. All of them were carved from a single piece of rock. Claims the Ajanta caves have been constructed with the aid of advanced technology in ancient times are seriously considered. Considering the Ellora and Ajanta complexes together, both were carved out of the solid living bedrock comprising of ancient basalts, a magnificent feat unprecedented. The Ajanta caves specifically are a collection of man-made recesses near an ancient waterfall. According to the official narrative, the Ajanta caves were the work of Buddhist monks, although this is now being questioned by outsiders. Although occupying the site from around the 2nd century BCE to the 6th century CE, and in the case of Ellora not long after that, being occupiers doesn't make them the creators. The temples are Cambodia, Angkor Wat, and Angkor Thom are perfect examples of this. Some geologists have staked claims these structures are recessed in natural rock cliffs. Completely unfounded and poorly researched from afar, there is also the pristine example of the Kailasa temple carved from the bedrock. Geology hates this thrown at them in response. It's the usual attempt to explain away and not explain. Kailasa temple is not a cave but an actual freestanding structure approximately 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, and nearly 100 feet tall. At Ellora, outside researchers don't know what to call these structures. Buddhist, Hindu, or Jain, there are influences from all three, and clearly all additional in design. These structures are not typical caves in any natural sense, rather rock-built mansions with a palatial feeling to the interiors and scaled to multiple stories. The spectacular amount of time and energy went into carving and decorating these caves is obvious and stupefying. The decorative facades, ornate sculptures, and intricate reliefs speak volumes. Do not say basic chisels and expect not to be laughed at. They mirror Petra in Jordan, but do not forget they're basaltic and up a cliff. They mirror the engineering feats of the Cappadocia region in Turkey, where underground cities were built into the bedrock, Derinkuyu being the most pristine example. The basalts of Ajanta and Ellora temples are quite different, much harder and extremely difficult to carve than the volcanic bedrock of Cappadocia. Adding to the mystery of Ajanta and Ellora, we're being brainwashed that it's the work of monks. Monks have never been connected in any way to advanced feats of construction. Why are there no records of their technology? These caves are advanced carved technology, and using the word caves is not just degrading to the master masons, it doesn't represent the mind-boggling engineering. Monks are only known for ancient advanced faith. Ancient sites around the globe that have temples like Ajanta and Ellora show evidence time and again of reuse. Try telling that to the archaeologists and historians. Try asking them why they were originally built. They just don't want to know. There's also the enigma of the so-called unfinished or abandoned caves numbering 12 in total. They're rough-hewn, lacking any carvings or other specifics. They are thus assumed unfinished and abandoned. Why abandoned 12 times over? Many have speculated the two ancient sites are many thousands of years older than previously thought, mere heirlooms in our feeble insight to comprehend. It's naturally suspicious to think the Indian monks reused the rediscoveries of Ellora and Ajanta for some unknown epoch. A new revolutionary theory suggests the man-made complex was a refuge, originally and then later inhabited. It's ideally located for such an incident in terms of cataclysms. Some are pushing the original complex to the end of the last ice age, later rediscovered, repurposed, and reused at a much later time. There's more to support this than any other evidence. The electric universe theory states we were bombarded with plasma and other such phenomena in distant epochs, presumably the last ice age. In the Indus Valley in ancient times, there survives a script which clearly depicts plasma symbols and behavior. It has many times been compared and connected to the Rongo Rongo script of Easter Island. Both are either fine, perfect accidental examples of plasma phenomena, or they were drawing what they saw in the skies. Ajanta and Ellora has such symbols too. Petroglyphs all around the world show this phenomena, and it warrants further study. There is a conventional interpretation for these symbols in Hinduism, and then there's also the deep antiquity angle. The Ajanta and Ellora caves and temples, although heavily modified and repurposed in later epochs, speak of millennia, not centuries. They preserve a window into that distant time. If we focus on Kailasa Temple again, we ask ourselves, what makes it the single most divine rock structure temple in the world? It's not the mysterious origin outlined. It's not the intense intellectual prowess of the advanced machining you observe there. It's the advanced acoustics and ambiance you cannot escape when you're there. Legends claim a special mantra was performed on the rock, which has energized it to this day. It is the chanting of Vedic mantras that energize it and sanctify this amazing structure. Legends or no legends, still today mantras resonate, vibrate, and echo in the most astonishing way. Many feel they're connected to the Vedic cosmos. Even the sheer enormity of the temple complex makes you feel the endless creation of the infinite universe. Everyone feels immense power when the resonance kicks in, but was this intentional? Was this the desired effect? About the only thing we do know about both these temples is what we don't know. The exact dates of carving of Kailasa Temple is still unknown. The Kailasa Temple is carved out of a whole mountainside from bottom to top. We don't know how they did it or why. There's no mention anywhere where the rubble was disposed. Modern civil engineers have determined it's impossible to build the same temple in modern times with modern technology in just 18 years. We will not attribute any advanced technology, although we know it is advanced technology. The very context of the art and carvings speak of Hindu gods, creation, and technology, but historians see no connection to creativity and high technology, as this is just simple mythology. Bizarrely, Indian mythology talks about the history of Earth divided into time frames. 4 eras: Satyug, Tretayug, Dwapar and Kali Yug. Each yug, or time period, ends with complete annihilation of civilization. And out of the ashes, new civilization starts from zero once more. Even the mythology portrayed dictates there's lost technology we can't think about. And with the end of each cycle, everything vanished, even the technological civilization. This obviously mirrors the Mayan and Aztec mythology. Some people might argue that if our ancestors had such advanced technologies, then why isn't there any sign of them in the excavations? We don't leave our technology lying around, but we do leave byproducts of it. The Indian texts speak of so many scientific principles hidden in them in forms of shlokas and mantras, the very thing they want to invoke at the mysterious temples. Some scholars today have no interest in decoding them. There is mention of lost technology in ancient Indian texts, from time travel to airplanes to vimanas. One just needs a proper Sanskrit to decode them, but they're not the same scholars that control the archaeology of the Ajanta and Ellora caves. This brings us full circle as we look at the connection between Shiva and the Ellora caves, specifically Kailasa Temple. Shiva is always proclaimed the destroyer of worlds, who ends one creation and ushers in another new one. Shiva, or Siva, is one of the most important gods in the Hindu pantheon. A rather complex character, he may represent goodness, benevolence, and serve as the protector. But he also has a darker side as the leader. He's often associated with time, and particularly as the destroyer of all things. Yet Shiva is also associated with creation. In Hinduism, the universe is thought of in cycles every 2,160,000,000 years. Shiva is also known for abstaining from all forms of indulgence and pleasure, focusing on meditation to find perfect bliss. He is the most important Hindu god for the Shaivism sect and the protector of the Vedas, the sacred texts which are encoded on the carvings of Kailasa Temple. It is completely maddening that these magnificent structures were created, and then archaeologists and historians are so adamant in their claims that all these structures were built using nothing more than primitive tools and hard labor. Ancient builders used advanced technology and high-tech machines to accomplish this feat of engineering. Ajanta and Ellora caves, although presented here as one and often addressed as one phenomenon, which the year may have many stark differences, besides being in 2 locations. Ajanta caves are carved in a horseshoe-shaped rock. Ellora caves are scattered randomly in a matrix network. Ajanta caves are labeled in the period between 200 BCE and 680 CE. On the other hand, Ellora caves are labeled as being built between the 5th and 10th century, although clearly the same mindset is at play in both locations. They're repeatedly labeled as different purposes of creation. Ajanta caves has viharas and Buddhist monasteries. Ellora caves consist of religious centers for Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain. We have already discussed both locations are most likely inherited, and respective faiths etch their heirlooms with their own respective styles. We see ancient monuments all around the globe: Egypt, Borobudur in Indonesia, and the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. And we ask ourselves, how? Why, and we marvel, how could mankind, so far back in time, build such enormous structures? And all without the advanced technology we enjoy today. Then we have precision like Ellora and Ajanta largely ignored. There are some 28 million Sanskrit texts still waiting for experts to translate. which amounts to all the other civilizations' writings combined. The same writings that are on Ellora and Ajanta. If we could interpret just a small fraction of them, we might find the solution to the enigmas of these places. Maybe a reason why it's a tribute to the divine Lord Shiva to symbolize his home on Mount Kailash in the Himalayas. Basic questions like man-hours can be solved on temple building. We are told by the scholars who haven't translated any texts that people were working 12 hours a day, every day for 20 years. And they dug up no less than 20,000 tons a year, 1,666 tons a month, 55 tons a day, or 4 to 5 tons of rock every single hour. Don't forget you can only get so many people into the spaces to do this. The mainstream account only quantifies rocks and dust that have to be removed from the place, not the actual excavation of the temple. What about as the time and workforce required, so just the Kailasa temple could look like the temple it's finished? The complex and aesthetic manner it was done make this temple stand out amongst the others. While on the top there are carved statues of elephants, the inside is filled with numerous statues and reliefs, as well as delicate carvings engraved in almost every inch of every corner. The 100-foot tall pillar and the elephants in the arcades carved at the very bottom of the temple, which gave the impression that they're carrying Mount Kailash on their backs, make this place magnificent beyond belief. The most remarkable aspect of the entire saga of research into these man-made cave temples is perhaps the context. They speak about high technology. They are high technology. The whole ancient Indian epics speak about weird interactions with Hindu gods who possess high technology. They are a direct conduit to the ancient past where the Indian epics originate. And we're blessed to have such pristine examples of obvious advanced technology still surviving today.
Now, I'm asking one question today. It's to do with the granite of Egypt. In Egypt, there's a lot of granite. How was it cut? How is it separated from the bedrock? We'll look at what it looks like in the bedrock when we go to the unfinished obelisk. How is it carved? How is it shaped? How is it smoothed? Because some of it is really spectacular when you look at the detail of it. And how is it removed from the Aswan quarry and placed in position? We're not talking little lumps of rock here. Now, I have a rock box. This box represents 1 cubic foot. I know, because I made it. If that was granite, it would weigh the same as me. 180 pounds or thereabouts. Most stone weighs about that. If it was full of water, it would weigh just over 60 pounds. Pretty well too heavy to lift. If it's full of air, you can lift it. Now in it, my rock box, there's 3 types of stone. We need to get it sorted. This is limestone. This is from the Carrara quarry, Carrara marble quarry in Italy. This is sandstone. Now, sandstone is made basically of compressed quartz, other material, other minerals. compressed under pressure. This is from my garden. And a piece of granite from the Gyges Plateau, and a piece of granite from Aberdeen. They come in different colors, and they're all about the same weight. Now, this particular piece of granite has been melted. You may not think that's very strange, but anybody who's ever tried to melt granite with an oxyacetylene torch, which most people would think of as the thing to, will know that it's extremely dangerous. It just flakes off, because the different components of granite melt at different temperatures. This has been melted with Brown's gas. If you're not familiar with Brown's gas, check it out on the internet, but it's named after Yule Brown, who was a Hungarian who identified it. It's the electrolysis of water which produces hydrogen and oxygen as a gas. Combine the two and you get Brown's gas. And it has remarkable properties, one of which is the neutralization of nuclear waste. But we're not getting into that area now. We're going to go to Egypt. See what happens when you go to Egypt. The pyramids. Most people are familiar with the pyramids. Most people are familiar with what basically ancient Egypt looks like. The tourist version of Egypt. It's always nice to see what it looks like. And it's worth going to Egypt to see some of the really quite remarkable edifices, call them what you like. Now, the pyramids themselves are worth looking at, if only because for something that not many people are actually aware of. If you look at the aerial photograph of the pyramids, which was taken by the Iconos satellite, and you think, okay, yeah, that's an interesting picture. It shows them in that famous formation which appears to replicate Orion's belt. But other than that, look at the Great Pyramid, which is the one at the top. The Great Pyramid appears to have something down the center of each face. It looks like a line. You can't see it when you're there unless you know what to look for. But each of those faces of the Great Pyramid, and no other pyramid, the Great Pyramid is concave. If you took a straight line across the base, which is about 750 foot across, there's a concave face on each of them. It's out of the straight line by about 4 feet. Now, I was aware of this, and I thought, I wonder if it's possible to see it, because it was first identified back in 1935 when an aerial photograph was taken quite accidentally of the pyramids, and it showed the concave face then. And I thought, I wonder if it's possible to see it. And it is. I happened to be there in March, and at 6 o'clock in the evening, the sun is to the west, setting in the west, which is on the right-hand side of the picture, shining across the face of the Great Pyramid. And the left-hand face of the Great Pyramid is illuminated, the right-hand face isn't, which indicates that there is something about the construction of the Great Pyramid which is really quite remarkable. How was that achieved? Because it is certainly there. So that's the first indication that these guys in Egypt knew about their technology. They knew what to do. They knew how to make things really very sophisticated. Right, inside the King's Chamber, we have the indication as to how it's built, the difference between the granite and the limestone. And the famous sarcophagus, as it's called, which indicates it was used to bury somebody. There's no evidence for that. And that's what we're looking at today, evidence. The sarcophagus, the box, it's hollow. It's hollow, and if you care to measure the surfaces, both of the inside and the outside of this box, they are perfectly parallel to each other, They are completely flat in that they are what would be described as optically flat. It's one piece of granite, which if you do the calculation, you can find out that it weighs about 4 tons, 4.5 tons. Around it in the room, which is quite a big room, the King's Chamber, is lined with granite, and above it are 5 layers of granite beams, which weigh about 70 tons each. There's 45 of them. Now, bear in mind, this is all 150 foot above ground level. So you have to work out how you get a 70-ton block of granite 150 foot into the air. It's about just a bit shorter than the height of Nelson's column, as an indication as to its position. And a lot of people will say, oh, it can't be done. We don't have cranes even today that can lift that. Well, actually, we do have cranes that could do that. It would take about 8 days to erect the crane in position, and it couldn't move, but it could lift. Well, modern cranes can lift up to 3,000 tons. So you go onto a website, or you search for massive cranes, and you'll find them all there. Some of them are mobile, but they're not mobile while they're working. They're mobile, shifting from side to side. So in the King's Chamber, we have the first evidence of some pretty advanced technology. Why is a box, which incidentally is too big to go through the only entrance into the King's Chamber, it's too big by about an inch, so it had to be placed in there before the pyramid was completed, because otherwise you couldn't get it in. Why? What's going on? It's a real mystery as to what the Egyptians were trying to achieve. We don't know. They didn't leave any records as to what they were doing. They probably thought it was so easy to do and common, and they didn't bother to write about it. Outside the pyramids, you have the Sphinx, worth going to. If you can get into the Sphinx enclosure, it's worth a visit, because around the edge of the Sphinx enclosure are the famous water-eroded sides, which indicates the age of the Sphinx being much older than we're told it is. 2,500 years, 4,500 years old, 2,500 BC or thereabouts. The ages I'm not really too concerned about. The pharaohs I'm not really too concerned about, because that's not what we're here to look at. In order to make the Sphinx enclosure, just to go back, the Sphinx is below existing ground level. You'll see around it those sides which appear to have been eroded by water. That erosion doesn't occur through wind erosion, and it's quite big. So when they hollowed out the Sphinx enclosure, where did they put the bits that they dug out? They put them up. It's called the Valley Temple, which is just next door to the Sphinx. If you look at the face of the Sphinx, it's to the left. There are 2 temples. One is called the Valley Temple. The other is called the Sphinx Temple. And very, very few people have been into the Sphinx Temple, the one directly in front of it, because nobody knew it was there, because it was under sand till about 70, 80 years ago. The Valley Temple, this is the outside of the Valley Temple. The inside of the Valley Temple is lined with granite. You see at the top left, the outside walls of limestone, but the inside is granite. And some of the granite stones are not just blocks of granite, they have been carved into L shapes. The top center is an L shape. And on the right-hand side, something even more remarkable, the granite has been carved around contours of the limestone blocks, which makes no sense whatsoever, but it's true. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I looked at it and I thought, why do you carve granite around limestone? Why don't you just cut the limestone? That's the easy thing to do. Limestone is very easy to cut. Granite is actually hard, as we'll discover. But in Egypt, it was obviously the simple way to do it. You cut round. Outside the Sphinx Temple is this strange piece of granite. It's just lying on the ground, as if Nobody knew what it was, nobody knew what to do with it, but it's sitting there, a piece of granite, which has two compound curves on it. It's about 3 foot high. I suspect it was supposed to be a coping stone from the top and it just fell off one day. But close to it is another piece, even more remarkable. How was this carved? This is granite, one of the hardest materials known, which is why you make curbstones out of them, why you make cobblestones out of granite, because they're hard wearing and tough to cut. Nowadays we cut it with diamond-tipped drills and tungsten chisels, but in Egypt they didn't have those. So how was this piece carved? It's almost as if it was carved on a lathe, because that curve, which has been measured, is totally uniform across its length. This is one of the major mysteries which is never addressed by modern Egyptologists, who will insist that, well, we'll show a little later how modern Egyptologists insist the granite was cut. Okay, let's go and have a look at where the granite comes from, which is down at Aswan, 500 miles south of Giza. And when you get to Aswan, you have a nice go on the river in a felucca, all very nice. That, by the way, is Duncan Rhodes, who is the editor of Nexus. And you come to the unfinished obelisk at Aswan. Just over 40 meters long, 120 foot long. And it's a massive lump of rock. It's still attached to the bedrock. All sorts of reasons have been offered as to why it's still attached to the bedrock. Oh, it's split. I couldn't find a split on it, not that would damage it to that extent. But it is very, very large. And it sits there inside the trench that has been cut around it. Now, if you're going to Egypt, do go to Aswan, because it is really one of the more mysterious places you'll visit. There are more mysterious places, but this is where it all begins. And I was first aware of a problem when I looked specifically at these marks at the bottom of the unfinished obelisk. They look like scoop marks. They look like somebody's... Right now? We're back on circuit. Thanks, guys. Right. These scoop marks, when you start to look for them, appear everywhere. Top left picture shows those same scoop marks we identified earlier. And then you start looking at all sorts of other, and the same thing. They are fairly uniform, about 6 inches square down in the bottom left-hand corner. But then on the right, we see the incontrovertible evidence of a piece of granite that has been removed from the quarry. And it has been undercut so that there was a short line of granite still attaching it to the bedrock. And the obvious way to remove it is just to hit it hard enough so that it breaks off. Granite is quite brittle, it can fracture quite well. But what are the marks up to it? What are these scoop marks? Where do they all come from? What created them? What caused them? And then you look at the unfinished obelisk itself. The top left picture indicates the depth of this trench around it. And below it you see the same scoop marks all along the edge of the unfinished obelisk. Now, if you're not looking for them, you probably wouldn't notice them, because it needs the sun in a certain position to cast the right shadow. And in this trench, on the right-hand side, not only are the scoop marks going right the way down to the bottom and along the bottom of the trench, but there's a hole in the trench. It's about 3 foot deep. Yes, that was carved by pounding deerite balls, wasn't it? This is the explanation offered by Egyptologists as to how these things were carved. All granite was carved by pounding deerite balls. And on the right-hand side, we have a gentleman pounding his deerite ball, demonstrating how it was done. Yeah, quite. I don't go with that, as you can probably gather. It just seems so unlikely that the evidence we see was created by such a crude method. It just wouldn't do it. Because not only would it not carve the obelisk itself, it would hardly touch or create hieroglyphs or the statues, which are in museums right across the world, from Cairo to London to Boston. This one is in Luxor. This is one of the most remarkable pieces of granite carving I've ever seen. If you look at the quality and the sheer delicacy of those features, it doesn't matter who it represents at this stage, but that piece of granite itself would be quite heavy, not something easily manipulated. But the quality of the carving is as good as any modern sculptor could possibly achieve in limestone, let alone in granite. In basalt, which is another volcanic extrusion, we get the same quality of carving. These are life-size images, as is the famous statue of allegedly Pharaoh Khafre being protected by Horus. That is about 8 foot high. It's bigger than life-size, that statue. And then in the Cairo Museum, again, we get one of the most remarkable sculptures I've ever seen. Creating an animal-human hybrid and making it not only realistic, but totally believable, takes a skill that I don't think we have today. Could any sculptor today recreate these type of sculptures? Because these are bigger than life-size themselves. I don't know. It would be great to find out. I have a friend who's a sculptor. I asked him. He said, I wouldn't do that in granite. What a stupid idea. You know, one wrong chisel blow and you've shattered the whole thing. You got to start all over again. Where do you get a piece of granite? It must have weighed about 10 tons to start with. How do you move it? Well, obviously they moved it because they created it. And in the centerpiece of the Cairo Museum is this capstone. Or it could be a Ben stone, depends what you call it. It's supposed to go on top of a pyramid. Again, it's in basalt, which is a very hard volcanic material. And if you look at the detail of it, how do you achieve that level of quality, consistency, and accuracy with a diorite ball? I don't think you do. Something else must have been used. We'll come to what I think it might have been just a little bit later. But first of all, obviously, if you're in the Cairo Museum, you have to visit Tutankhamun and his famous mask. It's a very beautiful object. It's worth seeing. We've all seen the front of it, so I thought, how many people have ever seen the back of it? This is the back of it. It always attracts a big crowd. It's worth going to see. And then tucked away in a corner, you get these weird things. We know what they are. They're boomerangs. By the way, the chap there is David Hatcher Childress. If you've ever met him, you'll know he's a great explorer. And he said, I'm going to stand in front of that. I want people to see me in boomerangs. But these are in the Cairo Museum. Most of them were taken out of Tutankhamun's tomb. Well, he died about 1300 BC or thereabouts, 1200 BC, a long time ago. So how did the boomerangs get there? Because we all associate boomerangs with Australia. Because the Egyptians went there, to Australia. There's evidence, quite hard evidence, of hieroglyphs appearing in the Blue Mountains, north of Sydney. And they say they came, they were trying to find gold, I think it was, and they got shipwrecked and couldn't get back. But obviously some of them got back because they brought they call them hunting sticks, throwing sticks, boomerangs. So the idea that the Egyptians couldn't travel long distances across sea. In fact, going by sea from Egypt to Australia, the longest stretch of unbroken water you'd need to cross is only about 70 miles. Hopefully it wasn't that difficult. Anyway, we need to move up from there, and Egypt is a great place to visit. That's on the top right is Hatshepsut's temple, where they had the massacre of tourists there about 15 years ago, which caused a bit of a blip in tourism, but This is looking pretty well due west, and the desert starts about a mile either side of the Nile, and you have to go 3,000 miles across the desert before you get to the Atlantic. So it's not a comfortable place to travel across. However, this is at Luxor, and about 50 miles north of Luxor is this. How many people have ever been here, visited this place? One, two, oh, a few. Good, well done. So a lot of people, this is probably totally unfamiliar, the Osarium at Abydos. It's about a 2-hour drive north of Luxor. It was discovered in 1885, I believe, by Flinders Petrie, who noticed a dip in the ground and thought, oh, I wonder what's in that dip, and he dug it, and this is what they found. So nobody knew about it until about 120 years ago. It's called the Osarium because it is assumed to be the place where Osiris was buried. There's no evidence for that at all. You'll notice that the ground inside it is wet. And there are pools of water. There are constructed places of water. And when I was there, which is quite rare to see it dry enough for you to actually get into it. Most people sort of look at it from the top because the place has got about a foot of water in it. And the water goes up and down. Why does the water go up and down? Because it's connected to the Nile, is the answer. I saw catfish swimming in one of those pools. Quite a big catfish. You know, he's a brave catfish because he must have come up from the Nile. But why would it be connected to the Nile? It's never been established as to why or how, because the Nile at this stage is about 5 miles away. The Nile moves its position, has moved over many years. But these blocks, which come from Aswan, weigh about 100 tons each, and you can see the sheer size of them, would take moving them a bit of a manipulation. My contention is that this place was never finished. It appears to have been damaged. That top beam there has had a major chunk cut out of it. To get that sort of amount of granite out of a block is quite difficult, unless it is hit very hard. I don't know if it was or not, but obviously they finished the outside of this Osarium before they finished the inside. And then you start to see these really quite remarkable pieces of evidence for something happening. You notice the doors appear to have been made to a specific height which had no relationship to the size of the blocks creating the frame. You'd think if they wanted a door of a certain height, you'd build it up so that the top frame, the top block, was level. No, they carved the doorway to the height required. And then moving from the doorways to the right, you'll see the block that fitted in very accurately into a very specific location, just above it, similar thing. And then the end doorway here, and above that, again, it's the same thing. The blocks weren't the right height, so they carved the doorway out of another. It just doesn't make sense. That's not how we'd work today, so we shouldn't really apply today's technology to what we see in Egypt. And above the door, to the left and directly above it, are protuberances on some of the blocks. What are those about? Why are those there? Are they to help move the block? Were they created when the block was made? It had to be made to a certain size and they didn't have enough, couldn't be bothered to take the last bit out? I don't know. But these start to appear in a lot of other places as well. Now, we need to move out from Egypt because we've got other places to go to. So we'll go via helicopter, which is the obvious way to go when you're in Egypt. This is a panel that is in the temple of Seti I, which is directly behind the Osarium. It's always caused a lot of controversy, this, because it appears to show a helicopter at the top. Is that a tank on the right? A submarine below it? I don't know. You ask the average Egyptologist and they'll say, no, it's a palimpsest. It's a they remade it, remodeled it, bits fell off it, and it made some strange shapes. Yeah, big deal. There's no bits falling off that. Oh, I don't know, is it a helicopter? You decide. Let's go up to London, to the Petrie Museum, and look at the more detailed aspects of some of this granite carving. These were all collected by Flinders Petrie, and he collected so many of them, they have a museum named after him now. It's called the Petrie Museum, and it's part of University College London. And the picture on the left is the famous core number 7, which you may have heard discussed in various other places. This is a picture I took of core number 7 to show the striations around it. It's about 2 inches in diameter. And those striations are a continuous circle. They're not individual circles. You take a piece of cotton and you wind it around it, and you wind it around it, and you can go for about 5 or 6 turns around it. So it's a spiral. Whether the one in the middle is the same, I don't know, but again, that's in granite, and the picture on the right shows not only a core sample, but a drilled sample as well. These are relatively small pieces of granite. They were obviously pushed aside because Flinders Petrie found them lying around on the Giza Plateau when he spent the best part of 10 years measuring the pyramids and excavating quite extensively around Giza. More detail on that, you'll notice the number at the bottom, University College. And on the right is a piece of granite which appears to have been sawn at 1 centimetre spacing. Now, this piece here, this is, again, was picked up at Giza. It appears to be, it's about the size of a grapefruit, half a grapefruit. It appears to be how, in Egypt, they hollowed out bowls. They drilled them. If anybody can tell me that this picture does not represent drills, you can see in the center one the striations of something going down the shaft, and at the bottom you've got a center core that's been knocked out, and this is how the box in the Great Pyramid was hollowed out. It was drilled out. But drilling in granite, yes, it can be done very easily today, but you need diamond tip drills to do it. In Egypt, there's no evidence that diamonds existed. So how was it done? The evidence indicates it was done because that's what we're looking at. And unfortunately, this is the explanation. No, I just don't go with it. I don't think that it makes any sense at all to continue down that particular route. So let's go somewhere much better. Avebury. Again, we have huge blocks of stone, obviously moved very easily by people. Now, one point, the next series of pictures we'll look at is from around the world. And with one exception, which is obvious, with one exception, we don't know who did it. We're told by historians, oh, well, it was moved by the Beaker people. This lot. The Beaker people moved this. Yeah. We don't have hard, factual evidence. The only evidence we can see with our own eyes is that they were moved. That's all we know. Who by, we can guess at. How, we can guess at. Because when you start moving around the world, to France, to Ireland, to Spain, bottom left, Germany, you see the same thing, huge blocks of stone. That one at Karnak, which is now broken, but it did originally weigh about 300 tons. It fell over one day. Obviously it wasn't anchored properly, foundations, no building regulations then, and didn't build a foundation big enough. You go to Greece, Turkey, and Malta, you see the same thing. Huge blocks of stone moved, apparently at ease, into positions which we would really question whether it should be done today. Get down to Morocco, and you see the same thing. This is on the Atlantic coast, at a place called Lixus. Lixus still exists, it's a river mouth. And it was reported originally by the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians originated from what we now call Lebanon, and they were trading extensively with South America. So obviously they go through what we call Gibraltar today, across to South America. Phoenician coins, Phoenician inscriptions have been found in South America. I don't think there's very much doubt there was a great deal of trade between the Mediterranean and South America. You know, there was Stonehenge in Libya. Extraordinary. These things just remain almost ignored. I'm indebted, in this case, to Robert Temple, who published this on his website, Atlantis, Egyptian Dawn. Very old photographs. They were taken about 1930, but it's worth going onto his website, atlantisdawn.com, I think it is. There's a lot of other photographs there. He's done some meticulous research in Egypt and around the world. And then this one, it's not exactly a megalith, but it's such an unusual place. It is in Zimbabwe, and that's why the country is called Zimbabwe. It's after this remarkable structure, which we're told was built in about 800 AD. 800 AD? It's the only one in Africa that looks anything like it, built then. It's big, and it was badly desecrated by those famous imperialists, the British. Sorry, guys. Now, moving north, we come to Jerusalem and the temple, the contested Herod's temple, Solomon's temple. In the big picture, it shows the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, would be known as, and the lower left is a picture by Martin Gray from his book Sacred Sites, which appears almost unremarkable. He shows a rabbi and a soldier both praying together. But it's the stone that got my attention. It's a dressed stone. It's almost certainly sandstone in this case, but it's big. And the western wall of Solomon's Temple is about 1,500 foot long. And you'll notice that on the left of the western wall, the Wailing Wall, there appears to be a brick wall and a dead end. And the western wall itself continues underneath those buildings. And these stones are huge. They are vast. You can go, there are tours you can go. If you go to Israel, you can take a tour in the Western Wall tunnels. And now we come to the biggest stone ever moved, we're told. They are big. This is the Trilithon at Baalbek in Lebanon, and the famous stone in the quarry that has never been moved because it allegedly was too big. It's actually never been moved because it's still attached to the bedrock. It's not the biggest stone ever moved by man. The biggest stone ever moved by man is in Russia. It's the plinth of the bronze horseman at St. Petersburg. Has anybody ever seen this statue in real life? No, I'd never seen it. I didn't know about it. In Russia, it's as famous as the Eiffel Tower is in France. It's the symbol of St. Petersburg. The statue is of Peter the Great, and the thunderstone on which it is mounted was put there by Catherine the Great, his successor, to symbolize the greatness of Russia. Fair enough. The statue itself is about 20 foot high, and the stone is about 20 foot high. It's called a thunderstone because it originated from Finland, where it was split off from a mountain during a thunderstorm, hence its name. And this particular lump of rock was moved. It basically symbolizes Peter the Great and his horse rearing up. Underneath his horse there is a snake at the edge of a cliff. That's what it's meant to represent. But the stone itself was moved in 1770 from Finland. Actually, it's not as far as it sounds. Finland and St. Petersburg are relatively close to each other. But the stone had to be moved across ground. It was moved in winter when the ground was frozen. And you'll notice there are channels underneath the stone in which there are ball bearings, or cannonballs we'd call them today. And of course that's how you would move it. They're using what are called Roman winches, which are the capstan winches. To move it, it was moved a few feet at a time, then they'd dig the capstan winch out and go and plug it in a bit further down and do the whole process all over again. The guys on the stone are shaping it, which is why it doesn't look quite the same shape as it does in its final place. But this, 1,500 tons it weighs. By calculation, it being granite, we know how much granite weighs, box of it there. It's heavy stuff, 1,500 tons. It's the heaviest stone ever moved by man. Now, continue our tour across the world. India has some quite remarkable megaliths, which are hardly even discussed, let alone known about. The top right picture is in Kashmir. Obviously, they're rather like the ones at Calanesh and many other stone circles in Britain, a bit decrepit, but big. Indonesia, they're actually still doing it. This is 1930, this picture. You can see how many people it took, and they obviously managed to get somewhere with their large stones. I couldn't find a photograph of it having been erected. Again, moving on to Laos, the plain of jars in Laos. Nobody knows who made the jars or what they're for, but they're big. Below that in Korea, a huge 60-ton dolmen, just sort of sitting there. And then in Japan, huge too. These are big stones, they're all above ground level. And then we get a bit of more of a mystery, Yonaguni. This is south of Japan, north of Taiwan, Yonaguni. It's on the bottom of the string of islands coming south from Japan. That was a recreation of what was found underwater. Okinawa, which is one of the islands very close to Yonaguni, appears to have a similar type of structure on land. But we're not told about these things, are we? Because it would upset the consensus. Okay, now we're going to move to somewhere that very few people are even aware of, let alone seen it. Anybody familiar with Namnadal, Micronesia? Micronesia is north of Australia, south of Japan, left-hand side of the Pacific. It's the federated states of Micronesia, it's just that there's lots of little islands and they're all federated together as one country. These are basalt columns weighing up to 50 tons each, which were placed in position. Nobody knows who by, nobody knows what for, nobody knows when. All we can say is they were placed in position because we can see them placed in position. They came from the other side of the island, which is called Tonopeg. Namnadal is the name of the particular site. And there are hundreds of these things, thousands of blocks. And the legend states they were floated. Not on water, in the air. They were floated. Carrying on west, east rather. Anyway, Easter Island. We're all familiar with Easter Island, and they did the same thing there. Huge, huge blocks of granite, carved in the most extraordinary, with the most extraordinary ease, because there are hundreds of these Maui. And there's one, the top picture shows one still in the bedrock. And you'll notice it was easy to do it. And there are what appear to be these scoop marks again. And on Easter Island there is a megalithic wall. Contained within that wall is an insert very similar to the insert we saw at the Asarum at Abydos. Is there a link? Anyway, let's move up to the really important stuff. Machu Picchu. We've all seen pictures of it, we've all heard the story of it, discovered in 1911, 100 years ago this year, by Hiram Bingham of, I forget which university it was, but anyway, he discovered it, or he rediscovered it, because it was already there, just nobody knew it. Looking at some of the more detailed pictures of it, again, we see these protuberances on some of these very large blocks, and we see the ease with which they were carved or created. In Cusco, which is relatively close to Machu Picchu, on the other end of the Sacred Valley. Again, these protuberances and the ease with which and bottom left picture, are they really having a laugh? Did they thought, let's show what can be done with this technology? I mean, I think it's quite spectacular. And not only could they carve, manipulate relatively small blocks, these are only about 3 or 4 foot across, some of them, some of the bigger ones. But then you get to the really big stuff, and not only do they do huge blocks, they do lots and lots of them. And you get the same strange markings on these blocks. The scoop marks, the bottom left picture, it almost look like forklift truck mark, forklift truck positioning. It's not forklift trucks because they were built, well, nobody knows when they were built. The Incas said when the Spanish arrived in 1500, the Spanish said, who built this? And the Incas said, well, not us. They don't know who was. When was it built? We don't know. So nobody knows, despite any statements to the contrary, because anybody who says it was built by the Incas will have to back that statement up with some hard evidence, not just statements, because alongside these is this lot. What on earth is this about? The bottom right picture you see just behind, that's the blocks we've just been looking at. It's like, right, let's have a bit of a practice, chaps. Who can build some really interesting steps? Oh, right, okay. And there's plenty of other pictures of these like practice sessions that went on. Ollantay Tower boat, it's about 20 foot high, these 6 panels, and the blocks themselves came from quite a distance away. How were they brought there? Well, you'll be told they were dragged up on rollers. That's rubbish. You can't drag a 50-ton block of rock on rollers. Same place, same protuberances, same ease of manipulation. Now moving up from Peru into Bolivia to Tiwanaku, it looks different. It's slightly different. There's a different emphasis. There's an angularity about it, which we hadn't seen before. The famous Sun Gate at Tiwanaku. It looks impressive. It was broken, it fell over, and nobody knows why it fell over, but look at the way in which the doorway has been cut with straight edges. The fact that this is andesite. Andesite to South America is the same as granite is to Europe. It all comes out of volcanoes and comes out very hot from the earth and get cooled off. And depending on how it cooled, it will depend on the constituent parts. Moving up from Tiwanaku, you go to Pumapunku. This is the real strange, weird stuff, because it looks like a jumbled block of blocks, which it is. But look in more detail at some of those blocks and look at the angles and the sophistication of the carving. It is quite, this is modern stuff. Nobody knows how old it is. The oldest estimate that I know of is 15,000 BC, depending on the alignment of the temple, the original alignment of the temple, and the calculation of the alignment to modern day, and how much it's moved, and how long that would take. It doesn't actually matter. The point is, these exist. These are part of our natural world. Somebody achieved these. Somebody drilled holes. They're 6 millimeters in diameter on the right-hand side. They're 6 millimeters in diameter. Who could drill a hole in granite 6 millimeters in diameter at equal spacing over a considerable distance? It's about 4 foot high, that block on it. And then, those of you who remember Eric von Daniken and his book Chariots of the Gods, which started me on the journey 40 years ago, will remember that he referred to this particular location. It's called the Fort. It's about 600 miles west of Pumapunku. He referred to this particular strange marking as a UFO landing site. Now, of course, he didn't know that, but it's a brilliant piece of PR because everybody jumped up in arms and said it couldn't possibly be. They didn't have UFOs, and why would they want to land in such a ridiculously stupid place? And Eric von Däniken laughed all the way to the bank because he sold millions of his books because everybody got so annoyed with him. And he's carried on publishing. I think his last count is 40 million books sold. So he's sold a lot more than most academics have put together. Good for him. Back by Lake Titicaca, Amaru Mirror. It doesn't actually look over to Lake.
Yo, thanks for being here.
Close to the
great workout session.
So
The
it's a
last
Stargate.
sets actually felt the best.
I don't know what it is.
It's a good sign. The bicep curls, at least.
It exists. It's 23
We did a lot.
foot-
We did a lot.
central panel is 23 foot high, and the doorway.
Oh, good
is about
stuff. That's
6
great.
foot.
Somebody, thank you for being here, everybody.
Quite comfortable.
Keshev, Dick,
It's not so much what it
Baron,
is, what it represents, what it might be, where you might
Puerto
go,
Rican
what
Ashley,
Stargate, which
all
universe you'll
lurkers,
end up in. That doesn't
Diego
actually matter.
Ochoa.
I'm concerned with how it was done. How do you level off the side of the mountain?
Everybody, everyone.
Because that's
Thank you for
what
being
it
here.
has been, that's what has been done. It has been
Read
leveled,
somebody.
completely leveled. It's like somebody's taken a chisel to a piece of wood and made a nice flat surface. And I thought, hang on a minute, this is identical. The technology in this is identical, not just in size, but in effect to this. The entrance to the third pyramid at Giza. Look at how the granite has been removed to create a flat surface, a squared off area, and obviously look at the protuberances we see there all the time. And you think, hang on a minute, what is going on? These things, this is purely evident. Well, I haven't yet tried to explain how they were created. I'm going to do that in just a minute, if we've got time. Fido's advancing, so my time is approaching 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes for explanation. Let's look at something really interesting. Okay, how do you carve granite if you haven't got diamonds and tungsten tip chisels? One explanation, and this explanation has been offered in South America, you use the rock softening liquid. The rock softening liquid exists. It's been reported by Colonel Fawcett, who was an explorer, British explorer in 1920.